The breakdown was staged when Dion Rigsby realized his daughter was next. 38 mechanics stood behind the yellow line. Security cameras were being shut down. Evidence tape sealed the timing cover with chain of custody numbers. The billionaire CEO was watching him, not the Harley. But what Dion didn't know, the $2.3 million Harley was never broken. It was a moving vault, and the breakdown had been staged to force him, specifically him, to open the one chamber that couldn't be opened any other way. The titanium capsule inside? His dead wife's sealed investigation. 3 years after Sloan died in what looked like an accident, her evidence had been hidden inside the engine, and whoever killed her had already altered his 8-year-old daughter's school pickup route without permission. Drop a comment where you're watching from and subscribe before someone you trust changes your child's route. Because Dion Rigsby is about to discover how many families lost someone to counterfeit aircraft parts because one FAA investigator's audit got buried in Pulaski County. 38 mechanics couldn't diagnose why a $2.3 million Harley wouldn't start, but the billionaire CEO stopped them all the moment a black single dad walked past the lift. Dion Rigsby stood 6 feet from the bike with a work order for a compressor he'd been paying off in installments, still wearing a clean shirt from an overnight HVAC call-out in Denton County, and his 8-year-old daughter Layla pressed against his side with her purple backpack, the one with the star-shaped patch she'd sewn on herself, clutched tight against her chest the way kids do when grown-ups' faces say something is wrong. The 38th mechanic, a tuner from Plano in Collin County, stepped back from the Harley with grease on his knuckles and frustration carved into the lines around his mouth, and the foreman from the Dallas County shop kept his voice low as he told everyone to stay behind the yellow line, not because of safety protocol, but because someone had decided this engine needed witnesses more than it needed mechanics. Dion hadn't planned to be part of the scene, but the moment his eyes caught the strip of red evidence tape peeling slightly from the timing cover, the kind with chain of custody numbers printed in tiny black type, his body went still in a way that made Layla adjust the straps on her backpack twice without looking up. The tape didn't belong on a motorcycle repair, and Dion knew it the way you know when a bolt's been cross-threaded before you even touch it. But he kept his posture controlled because he'd learned what happens when you look curious around expensive problems in rooms where your skin tone is the only one that matches the shop floor and not the ownership. The security chief, Rafe Calder, sharp haircut, eyes that didn't blink much, told the foreman to shut down the bay cameras until the owner arrives. And that phrase landed wrong because the owner was already here, standing just outside the yellow line in a charcoal coat that didn't belong in a workshop. Maren Whitlock, the billionaire CEO whose name sat on buildings from Love Field to Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. And she wasn't watching the bike the way someone watches a broken possession. She was watching the roll-up door and the mechanics' faces like she was tracking a clock, and when her gaze flicked to Dion for the third time in as many minutes, he understood that whatever was happening here had a script, and he'd just walked into a role nobody had told him about. The starter free-spun again when the tuner tried one last time. Too light, almost harmless, and the $2.3 million machine sat dead on the lift while the mechanic's frustration shifted into something else. Fear of being the one who breaks a myth in front of someone who could afford to make breaking expensive. Dion didn't speak to be brave. He spoke because he recognized the mistake they were making, and because Layla's grip on those backpack straps had tightened for the 4th time, and he needed her out of rooms where silence felt like a held breath. If you open it, don't start with the fuel, he said, voice even, and the room turned the way rooms do when a man without a badge or uniform talks like he belongs. The foreman's expression hardened in a way that suggested Dion had just crossed a line drawn in someone else's shop, someone else's authority. Who are you? Dion glanced at Layla, then back at the bike. A dad, he said, and that tape isn't normal. Maren Whitlock's eyes flicked to him in a way that felt like recognition dressed up as curiosity, and when she said, "Let him look," Rafe Calder's jaw tightened as if the decision wasn't hers to make. When the foreman finally admitted what nobody wanted to say, "We can't keep guessing without opening it," Maren Whitlock's face didn't show the worry of someone about to watch their prize machine get dissected by strangers. It showed relief, quiet and controlled, like a door she'd been waiting to open had finally found the right set of hands. Dion stepped forward slowly, letting his gaze travel along the harness routing and fasteners, following the logic the engine had been designed to follow, the mechanical truth in every connection. He started with the small inconsistencies that make your stomach tighten before your mind catches up. The timing cover bolts had been torqued in an odd pattern, not factory standard, and one bolt head showed fresh tool marks even though the casing was otherwise spotless. Layla shifted behind him and adjusted the straps on her purple backpack, her small fingers working the nylon without sound, tracking the tension in the room the way children do when adults stop explaining things. He leaned closer and saw a faint line of tamper paint on a sensor connector, the kind used in aviation maintenance to prove a seal hasn't been broken, and that detail didn't belong on a Harley from a private collection. Didn't belong anywhere near a motorcycle unless someone was treating this machine like evidence instead of machinery. He asked for a flashlight, and the foreman handed it over with slow, deliberate movement, as if he wanted every witness to remember he'd cooperated. Dion aimed the beam into the seam where the cover met the case, and the gasket looked new in a way that felt curated, too clean, like someone had replaced it yesterday and aged the bike around it. He loosened the cover with controlled movements, and when it gave, he eased it down like evidence. Inside, the timing chest was clean in a way that felt staged, deliberately arranged, and the mechanics held their breath because the first glance didn't reveal the obvious failure everyone expected. Dion kept going anyway, because obvious is where traps live. His hands found the planted problem fast, a composite plug dressed to look like metal, seated half a hair too deep, bleeding pressure in a way that would make the bike act sick without leaving a clear bruise. He replaced it with the correct part, reseated the connector, and stepped back without triumph. The foreman hit the starter, and the Harley caught immediately, deep and steady, a sound that filled the bay and pulled tension out of shoulders the way relief does when you've been holding something too long. Layla's grip loosened on her backpack straps for the first time since they'd entered the building. Even Rafe Calder exhaled through his nose like he'd been holding more than air. Marin Whitlock's face softened for half a second, and then Dion saw it. The softness didn't look like gratitude for a repair well done. It looked like someone seeing a door open that they'd been waiting to open, like someone watching the right hands finally touch the right mechanism at the right moment. Marin walked toward Dion and offered her hand with the controlled professionalism of someone who'd shaken 1,000 hands in rooms where power was measured in silence. And the mechanics watched because the gesture itself was a kind of currency, a public acknowledgement that carried weight in shops where billionaires didn't usually learn the names of the men who fixed their machines. "Thank you," she said, voice controlled, and Dion shook once and stepped back toward Layla because he understood when gratitude feels like prelude, when politeness serves as cover for something harder to name. "It wasn't broken the way you told them," he said quietly, and Marin Whitlock didn't deny it, didn't offer the explanation that should have followed a statement like that. She looked past him, toward the timing cover still resting in his hands, and the way she held her breath told Dion the repair wasn't the point, had never been the point. When Dion moved to close the cover and return the timing chest to its sealed darkness, Rafe Calder's voice cut in, low and quick, with the kind of authority that doesn't need volume to carry weight. "Don't," he said. "Not yet." That single interruption turned the room cold again, because you don't stop a man from closing an engine unless you need it open for something else, unless what's inside matters more than what's been fixed. Dion aimed the flashlight deeper into the timing chest, past the gears and clean metal, toward a circular plate that didn't match the machining around it. It wasn't a factory feature, sitting proud by maybe 0.5 millimeter, catching light wrong. He tapped it lightly with the plastic trim tool, and the sound came back dull instead of ringing, the kind of note metal makes when there's something hollow underneath. He pried with gentle pressure, and the plate lifted to reveal a titanium capsule epoxied into a cavity drilled with surgical precision. The capsule had a barcode sticker on it, small and official, the kind police departments use on evidence bags, and beneath it a stamped code that wasn't a manufacturer mark. It was a case number format, alphanumeric and structured, the kind of identifier that belongs in a filing system designed to track chain of custody through courts. Layla took 2 steps closer, her curiosity pulling her forward, and Dion shifted his body to keep her behind him, not because the capsule looked dangerous, but because the room's energy had changed. Marin Whitlock's voice cut through the silence before anyone else could process what they were seeing. "That doesn't leave this bay," she said. and when she stepped forward, her sleeve pulled back just enough to show a medical alert bracelet on her wrist, the kind people wear when their hearts don't keep time reliably. The foreman looked between the capsule and the bay door like he was calculating how fast a story this strange could travel through Dallas County. Rafe Calder didn't wait for questions. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge in a leather folder, flipped it open with practiced economy. U.S. Marshals Service, he said, voice flat. This is an active federal matter, and you're all being asked to remain in this building until we've secured transport. The mechanic's confusion hardened into fear because nobody calls federal agents for a broken motorcycle. Nobody positions a Billionaire's Harley in a county shop with evidence tape unless the breakdown was never about mechanics failing, but about forcing someone outside the operation to open the one chamber that couldn't be opened any other way. This Harley had never been a stranded luxury toy. It was a moving vault, and the staged breakdown was a controlled event designed to bring it into a shop full of independent witnesses, then force someone outside Maren Whitlock's payroll to open the one place she couldn't be seen opening herself. Dion held the capsule anyway, because the only thing more dangerous than holding something like that is letting someone else decide what it means. Layla's eyes were on him with the kind of trust children give their parents before the world teaches them trust has limits. Why was it sealed in an engine? He asked, and Maren's gaze flicked to Layla for just a beat, registering the purple backpack and the small hands adjusting those straps, before returning to Dion. Because nobody searches a Harley like they search a briefcase, she said quietly. And because the people who wanted it back don't follow traffic laws. They didn't call the local cops. Rafe didn't want patrol cars with flashing lights outside a bay door. He wanted the capsule intact and the shop quiet. He told the foreman to keep every mechanic in the building, gave a Tarrant County deputy on standby a short instruction through his radio, and looked at Dion with seriousness that doesn't need volume. You didn't ask to be in this, he said. But you are now. Dion's phone buzzed before anyone could say more, vibrating against his hip with the insistence of a call, and the number on the screen wasn't Texas. It was an Arkansas area code 479, the kind of detail that makes your throat tighten when you weren't expecting anyone from that state to have your number, when the only connection you have to Arkansas died in a funeral you attended 3 years ago in Pulaski County. He answered without thinking, muscle memory taking over, and the voice on the other end didn't introduce itself because it didn't need to. Mr. Rigsby, it said, calm, familiar with fear and how to use it. If you're holding the capsule, don't take your daughter home to Denton County. Don't take her to school in the morning. And don't let Ms. Whitlock convince you this started today. Dion's grip tightened around the phone, and his voice came out controlled in the way voices do when panic is being held down by force of will. Who is this? He asked, and the voice replied with a detail Dion hadn't heard out loud since a funeral in Pulaski County 3 years ago, a detail that existed only in family memory and the kind of documentation people seal when investigations go cold. Tell Layla to keep her backpack on. The voice said, calm and specific. Your wife wrote that in a report before she died. The phone went dead before Dion could respond, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight that lands when someone far away knows things about your child that only people close enough to hurt her should know. Maren Whitlock's face shifted when she saw Dion's expression, and Rafe Calder stepped closer without asking permission because federal agents recognized the look of a man receiving a threat in real time. What did they say? Rafe asked, and Dion didn't answer immediately because his mind was already running through the logic, the timeline, the details that had always felt wrong about Sloane's death, but never wrong enough to fight the paperwork that said single vehicle collision, icy road, Pulaski County, Arkansas, no witnesses. Sloane Rigsby hadn't died in a random crash the way the accident report claimed. She'd been an FAA investigator assigned to a counterfeit aviation parts pipeline that ran from salvage yards outside Jackson, Mississippi and Hinds County, up through distribution points in Memphis, Tennessee and Shelby County, and into hangars and procurement offices in Cook County, Illinois and Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, parts that could pass a visual inspection but fail under stress. Parts that made accidents look like bad luck instead of murder dressed up as mechanical failure. Dion hadn't been chosen because he was a lucky dad with sharp instincts. He'd been chosen because Sloane's sealed notes, her last audit trail, her documentation of serial numbers and tamper paint signatures, were what Marin Whitlock had been hiding inside the Harley. And because Dion was the only next of kin who could legally authenticate evidence buried in bureaucracy for 3 years, while people profited from counterfeit parts that killed from altitude. The capsule wasn't just evidence. It was Sloane's voice, trapped where nobody would think to look, and it surfaced today because the people hunting it had started leaning on the one leverage Dion still had. Layla shifted beside him and pulled a permission slip halfway out of her purple backpack, the one with the star-shaped patch. The slip was for a field trip scheduled in 2 days, Fort Worth Stockyards, Tarrant County, and Dion's blood went cold when he saw a route change written in pen across the bottom in handwriting that wasn't his. Pickup moved to Rowlett Community Center, Rockwall County, it said, with a timestamp that hadn't been there when Layla brought the form home last week. Someone had been close enough to touch school paperwork, close enough to change transportation routes through systems parents trust, and the realization landed with quiet violence. The capsule wasn't the only thing being moved on a schedule. So was his daughter's proximity to people Dion couldn't see coming. Marin Whitlock watched Dion read the slip, and whatever mask she wore cracked just enough to show something human underneath. "I didn't want it to touch your family," she said, and Dion believed she meant it, which made it worse, because it meant the threat was bigger than her intentions, bigger than federal badges, big enough to reach into a school system and change a form without triggering alarms. Rafe's hand hovered near his radio, and he didn't call for drama. He called for addresses, alternate routes, because the first loud move gets people hurt. Outside the bay, a dark SUV rolled past the shop's frontage road without slowing, the driver's face forward, the movement casual enough to look innocent if you weren't already scared, deliberate enough to be a clear message if you were. Rafe didn't chase it because chasing was what they wanted, the kind of reaction that separates a parent from a child in traffic and creates the opening someone needs to move a piece off the board. He only said, "We leave now," and Dion took Layla's hand the way he had at the beginning. Except this time it wasn't to step away from a rich person's problem. It was to step into the only place he could still control, his daughter's proximity, while the Harley idled behind them like a machine pretending to be nothing more than a machine. Subscribe before you ignore the quiet changes in systems you trust with your children's safety. They didn't move like people running from danger. They moved like people trying not to draw attention while calculating every exit, every sightline. Rafe led them through Dallas County back routes that avoided main arteries, industrial roads delivery drivers use when time matters more than comfort. The meeting point wasn't dramatic, a county facilities maintenance yard off State Highway 310, where road crews park salt trucks and nobody asks questions when 3 vehicles arrive within minutes, because shift changes happen at odd hours. Layla stayed close to Dion, her purple backpack pressed against her chest, fingers working the star-shaped patch, and Dion kept his hand on her shoulder because proximity was the only defense he had left. Marin Whitlock didn't look like a billionaire in the fluorescent light of the maintenance office. She looked like someone who'd been carrying weight long enough that posture had become a kind of armor, and when she finally spoke without cameras or mechanics or the performance of control, her voice came out quieter than Dion expected. "Whitlock Aviation's procurement chain got infiltrated 2 years ago," she said, sitting across a metal desk that still had grease stains from someone's lunch. Parts coming in with the right paperwork, the right serial numbers, passing visual inspection, but failing under load testing in ways that should have been impossible if they were actually manufactured to spec. She didn't speak like someone reciting a pitch. She spoke like someone who'd tried explaining this to lawyers and federal agents who cared more about liability than lives, and learned that legal channels close fast when the people profiting from fraud have contracts worth more than whistleblower protections. The capsule hidden inside the Harley was the only unaltered proof, Sloane's documentation that hadn't been sanitized through internal reviews, the kind of evidence that stays dangerous specifically because it can't be edited after the fact. Dion didn't soften just because Marin sounded human. "You used me," he said, voice level, and Marin didn't deny it. "I needed someone outside my payroll to open that engine in front of independent witnesses," she said. "Someone who couldn't be accused of planting evidence. Someone whose presence would be documented by security footage and mechanic testimony." Dion's jaw tightened because the logic made sense in a way that made him angrier, made him understand he'd been a tool before he'd been a person, And the only reason Layla was standing in a maintenance yard instead of sitting in her third-grade classroom was because someone had decided his usefulness was worth more than his daughter's routine. "I'm not your proof," he said. "And if keeping this capsule puts Layla in danger, I'm walking." Rafe Calder leaned against the wall with the stillness of someone who'd listened to civilians negotiate with reality before, and when he spoke, it wasn't to argue. "This operation has a leak," he said flat. "Someone inside federal procurement or Marshall's coordination has been feeding locations to the people running the counterfeit pipeline, which is why we couldn't move the capsule through normal evidence channels, why Marin had to hide it inside a machine nobody would search." The Harley had been a moving vault not because Marin was paranoid, but because every official container had already been mapped by someone who knew how evidence moved. Someone who could intercept a briefcase or federal courier, but couldn't stop a billionaire's motorcycle from breaking down in a random shop. Dion wanted to refuse, wanted to take Layla and disappear into a life that didn't involve capsules and dead wives and school routes that got changed by strangers. But the arithmetic was clear. If he walked, the people who'd already touched Layla's paperwork would assume he still had the capsule, would assume he knew what Sloan had documented, would keep leaning until something broke or someone disappeared the way Sloan had disappeared on an icy road in Pulaski County. Staying in the fight wasn't brave. It was the only option that kept Layla visible, kept her inside systems where people had to follow procedures instead of convenience. Rafe's phone buzzed, and when he looked at the screen his expression shifted in a way that told Dion the information wasn't good news. "We've got a hit," he said, voice tight. "The contractor that handles Layla's school transportation route is connected to a shipping lane that runs through Shelby County, Tennessee, same lane Sloan flagged in her last report before the crash." The documents Rafe spread across the metal desk looked boring until you understood what they meant, until you realized that procurement logs and serial number crosswalks were maps of how death moved through the supply chain. Dion leaned over the pages with the focus he'd learned from years of reading repair manuals and parts diagrams, the kind of focus that catches the one digit that doesn't match, the one signature that repeats when it shouldn't. The tamper paint he'd seen on the Harley's sensor connector wasn't unique to that engine. It appeared in photographs of components pulled from a salvage yard outside Jackson, Mississippi in Hinds County, showed up again on parts shipped through a freight corridor in Memphis, Tennessee in Shelby County, and reappeared in procurement records from a parts broker in Cook County, Illinois, and a hangar maintenance vendor in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Someone had been using the same verification method across multiple states, the same signature that was supposed to prove authenticity, but instead marked every component passing through the counterfeit pipeline. Dion's finger stopped on a procurement log entry dated 2 weeks ago, and the detail that caught his attention wasn't the serial number, but the routing information printed at the bottom. The parts were scheduled for installation on a medical helicopter that serviced a route between Dallas and Fort Worth, and when he cross-referenced the flight manifest, his stomach dropped because the helicopter's regular stops included the hospital where Layla had her last checkup 3 months ago. The same hospital where Dion had sat in a waiting room flipping through magazines while a doctor examined his daughter's sprained ankle from a playground fall. The counterfeit pipeline hadn't been an abstract threat. It had already intersected Layla's life without him realizing it, had already put her proximity to failure inside machines that were supposed to be inspected and safe. Marin pulled up a digital file on a tablet and turned it toward Dion without any explanation. It was a maintenance photograph from a vendor audit, and the component in the frame had the same tamper paint signature Dion had just traced across 4 states. The timestamp was 6 weeks old, and the location code made Dion's throat tighten. Layla's elementary school in Denton County, HVAC system maintenance, Building C, where the third-grade classrooms were. Someone from the pipeline had physical access to the systems that kept his daughter's school climate-controlled. Rafe didn't give Dion time to process the rage that was building in his chest because time wasn't something they had in surplus anymore. "The school route contractor audit we were planning to intercept tomorrow," he said, voice flat with the kind of control that comes from delivering bad news professionally. "It's been moved up. Tonight, 11 p.m. And Layla's pickup route change goes into effect at 7:30 tomorrow morning." Dion did the arithmetic in his head. Less than 9 hours between the audit and the moment someone would try to move his daughter onto a bus that wasn't supposed to be there. Less than 9 hours to verify evidence and coordinate with field agents, and prevent a transportation system from being used the way Sloane's crash had been used, as a way to make tragedy look like accident. The records Marin and Rafe had compiled weren't just proof of fraud. They were detailed timelines showing how the counterfeit pipeline adapted, how it moved through systems parents and patients trusted, because those systems relied on paperwork that looked legitimate until someone with mechanical knowledge cross-checked the details that didn't match. Dion had become that someone without choosing to, had become the person whose eyes could catch the wrong torque pattern or the signature that appeared too many times. And the only reason it mattered now was because his daughter's schedule had become part of the logistics someone was trying to control. Rafe's phone buzzed again, and when he read the screen, his jaw tightened in a way that said they'd just lost another critical advantage. "We've got a time-stamped entry," he said. "Points to a plan swap during the school transportation contract audit, and it's scheduled for tonight." Dion tried to build normal out of pieces that didn't fit together anymore. Tried to create the kind of routine that makes a child feel safe even when the adults around her are calculating exits and watching vehicles. He found a vending machine that still worked and bought Layla a granola bar and a bottle of water, sat her down at a break table in the maintenance yard where fluorescent lights hummed the way lights do in buildings that never sleep, and kept his voice steady even though his hands wanted to shake. "We're going to stay here for a little while," he said, not promising home or school, because those places weren't safe anymore, and lying to children doesn't protect them when the danger is real. Layla adjusted the straps on her purple backpack the way she always did when she was processing information she couldn't control, and when she looked at him, her eyes carried the kind of trust that made Dion's chest tighten. Rafe pulled up county records on a tablet while Marin cross-referenced transportation contracts, and what they found was methodical, the kind of bureaucratic penetration that happens when someone knows which forms to file and which staff members won't double-check signatures. The school route contractor had edited pickup locations across 7 campuses in Rockwall County and 3 more in Denton County, and the changes had been approved by an administrative assistant whose job was to process vendor updates without questioning them, because questioning every piece of paperwork would paralyze a system. The threat wasn't a masked villain. It was a person with database access and a login credential that looked legitimate. Dion realized what he was looking at wasn't just about counterfeit parts anymore. It was about how pipelines work when they're designed by people who understand that boring systems, transportation logistics, vendor management, routine audits, are the ones nobody watches closely. You don't hijack a school bus in a parking lot. You change the route in a database 3 weeks in advance and let the system execute the plan without drama. The same methodology that moved counterfeit parts from Mississippi to Wisconsin could move a child from a registered pickup point to an unregistered one. Marin looked at Dion across the table with an expression that carried weight she hadn't shared before, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than he'd heard it. "When I started looking for you," she said, "it wasn't random." Sloane's sealed notes documented something she called a family leverage protocol, a pattern where investigators who got too close started losing access to their children's routines, started seeing changes in school schedules and daycare pickups that couldn't be traced back to anyone specific. Dion's throat went tight because that detail reframed everything. She hadn't just needed a witness. She'd needed someone who would understand what was at stake, because he'd already lost someone to the same pattern. Layla shifted in her chair and pulled her purple backpack into her lap, and when Dion glanced down, he saw something that made his stomach turn cold. A small reflective sticker on the front pocket, the kind schools use for visibility on dark mornings. Except Layla's backpack hadn't had that sticker when they left the house this morning. "Where did that come from?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, and Layla looked at it like she was noticing it for the first time. "I don't know," she said. "It wasn't there yesterday." The realization landed. Someone had been close enough to touch her backpack, close enough to mark her. Dion's mind ran through scenarios he didn't want to imagine, tried to understand whether the threat was kidnapping or something quieter, something that looked like an accident where a child gets on the wrong vehicle and nobody realizes until too late. He looked at Layla and saw her watching him with the kind of attention children give when they know something is wrong, but they're waiting for adults to explain. Layla adjusted the straps on her backpack again, and then she said something that made the room go silent in a way that felt like all the air had been pulled out suddenly. "I saw that car before," she said, quiet and matter-of-fact. "The dark one that drove by. It was near my school last week. I thought it was somebody's parent." Subscribe before you ignore the car that's been circling your neighborhood twice this week. The plan Rafe laid out wasn't dramatic. It was procedural in the way operations are when failure means children don't come home and evidence disappears into legal channels. They would use the capsule as bait, stage a controlled handoff at a broker office near a hangar warehouse in Cook County, Illinois, coordinate with field agents who'd been kept outside the leak's reach, and use the school transportation audit as cover to intercept whoever tried to execute the route change that would move Layla from a registered pickup point to one that existed only in a database. The timing window was narrow, less than 8 hours between the Illinois operation and the moment Layla's school day would begin in Denton County, and the entire plan depended on Dion staying in Texas because his daughter's proximity mattered more than his verification skills, even though those skills were the only reason the operation had a chance of working. Dion wouldn't be in Cook County when the handoff happened, but he'd be on an encrypted video feed watching photos and component scans in real time, using his eyes the way he'd used them on the Harley's timing chest, catching the wrong torque pattern or the machining mark that didn't match factory specs. Rafe had learned that experts who fly to Illinois get followed, get compromised, and the only reason Dion was valuable was because nobody expected a single dad in a maintenance yard to be the linchpin in a federal operation. Marin sat across from Dion with the stillness that comes from making a choice that costs you something permanent. When this goes public, she said, Whitlock Aviation's name will be in every headline. Congressional hearings, vendor suspensions, audits that'll take years to clear. I'll lose contracts I spent 2 decades building. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was stating what justice looked like. But if I don't do this, Sloan's documentation stays buried, and the people running the counterfeit pipeline keep moving parts until something fails at altitude and kills everyone inside, and then they'll call it an accident and move the operation to a different state. Dion respected the choice, even if it didn't erase the fact that Marin had used him, had staged the breakdown and positioned his daughter near a federal operation without asking permission, had made decisions about his life because she'd decided the stakes were too high to let him choose whether to be involved. You could have told me, he said, and Marin didn't argue. I could have, she said. But you would have said no, and Layla would still be on a route someone else controls. Rafe's phone buzzed again, and Dion noticed the pattern he'd been watching for the last hour. Every call that came through made Rafe step outside the maintenance office, made him angle his body away from the security camera mounted near the door, made him speak in tones too low to hear through the glass, even when you tried. When Rafe came back inside, his expression was controlled in a way that said he'd just received information he didn't want to share yet, and Dion's instincts screamed at him the way they'd screamed when he saw evidence tape on an engine cover, when he saw tamper paint on a sensor connector, when he saw a sticker on his daughter's backpack that hadn't been there yesterday. Who keeps calling you? Dion asked, and Rafe's pause before answering was half a second too long, half a second that said the truth wasn't simple. Coordination, Rafe said, flat and unconvincing, and Dion didn't believe him because coordination doesn't require privacy, doesn't require stepping outside, doesn't require the kind of body language that suggests a man is managing information instead of sharing it. The leak wasn't theoretical anymore. It was in the room, sitting across from people who were supposed to trust each other because the alternative was letting children become logistics in a pipeline that treated human life the way it treated aviation components, replaceable if the paperwork looked legitimate. The timing window collapsed faster than anyone planned when Rafe's tablet lit up with a notification that made his jaw go tight in a way Dion recognized from watching his own face in mirrors after bad news arrived without warning. We've got a problem, Rafe said, voice controlled. Someone just showed up at the Cook County staging location, 2 hours early, with the correct case number. The convergence happened the way operations do when they've been planned down to the minute but executed in real time, where minutes don't behave the way plans expect them to. At 6:47 a.m. Central Time, federal agents moved on a hangar maintenance facility in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, coordinated with local law enforcement who'd been briefed 30 minutes earlier because briefing them sooner would have given the leak time to adjust. At the same moment, Dion stood in the parking lot of Layla's elementary school in Rockwall County, Texas, watching buses pull into numbered lanes while his daughter stayed close to him with her purple backpack clutched tight against her chest, her small fingers working the star-shaped patch she'd sewn on herself back when mornings felt normal. The encrypted comm unit Rafe had given him buzzed with updates from Milwaukee. Warehouse secured, ledger located, operational lead in custody. But Dion's attention stayed on the buses, on the rosters being checked at folding tables, on the contractor staff wearing lanyards that identified them as authorized personnel, even though one of those lanyards belonged to someone who shouldn't have been there. Dion had learned the system the way you learn systems when your child's safety depends on understanding which details matter. The buses were numbered, routes posted, check-in tables had clipboards with student names organized by pickup location, and protocol said parents weren't allowed past the yellow line unless they had written authorization. Dion didn't have authorization, but he had proximity, and he'd positioned himself where he could see Table 4, the one handling the Rowlett Community Center route added to the roster 3 weeks ago, without triggering alarms. The woman at Table 4 wore a lanyard that said Verified Contractor, and her name tag read K. Brennan, and Dion had never seen her at any of the morning pickups before this week, which meant either she was new or she'd been assigned to this route specifically. She held a clipboard and a radio, and when she called names, children lined up beside Bus 14 with the kind of obedience kids show when adults use confident voices and official-looking equipment, and nobody questioned her authority, because questioning authority in a school parking lot makes you look like the problem. Dion's comm unit buzzed again. Milwaukee raid yielded procurement records linking the contractor network to the school transportation audit, evidence secured, and the timing felt too precise, like someone had known exactly when the raid would happen. Layla Rigsby, the woman at Table 4 called, and Dion's chest went cold because that name shouldn't have been on that clipboard, shouldn't have been assigned to that route. Layla looked up at Dion with the question children ask when rules are changing, and Dion made the choice that defines every parent who refuses to let bureaucracy decide what safety means. He stepped past the yellow line without asking permission, walked directly to Table 4 with Layla's hand in his, and said with controlled clarity, "She's not on that route. Check your roster against the original district file." The woman's expression shifted in a way that said she'd been expecting compliance, not challenge. And when she looked at her clipboard, Dion saw the micro-hesitation that happens when paperwork doesn't match the story. "Sir, you need to stay behind the line," she said, voice firm, procedural, and Dion didn't move. "Show me the authorization that changed her route," he said. "Show me the parental signature. Show me anything that says I approved moving my daughter to a pickup point I've never used." The woman's hand moved toward her radio, and Dion's comm unit buzzed one final time with the update that mattered most. Operational lead in Milwaukee custody had just confirmed live intercept in progress at Rockwall County location. Units moving now. The school security officer approached with body language that said he wasn't sure whether Dion was a concerned parent or a threat, and the contractor woman kept her hand on the radio waiting for instructions that weren't coming. 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into the parking lot, and the woman at Table 4 understood in stages what was happening. Understood that the route she'd been assigned wasn't logistics. Understood that the children's names on her clipboard were evidence. Rafe Calder stepped out of the first vehicle with the stillness of someone who'd just closed a case that had taken 3 years and a Billionaire's custom Harley to break open. And when he looked at Dion, his expression carried exhaustion that comes from winning operations where winning means children stay safe instead of becoming footnotes in accident reports. "Layla Rigsby stays with her father," Rafe said to the contractor woman, voice flat. "And you're going to explain who told you to call her name." The arrests came in stages over 72 hours, coordinated across jurisdictions that don't always coordinate well, but coordinated anyway, because the evidence Dion had helped authenticate left no room for jurisdictional ego. The Milwaukee County raid yielded procurement records that mapped the counterfeit pipeline with the kind of precision prosecutors dream about. Serial number crosswalks showing where legitimate parts ended and counterfeit components began. Maintenance logs documenting installations that should have triggered red flags if anyone had been looking for patterns. Vendor contracts linking salvage yards in Hinds County, Mississippi to distribution points in Shelby County, Tennessee to hangar facilities in Cook County, Illinois that serviced aircraft flying routes most people assumed were safe. The operational lead didn't offer a villain speech or dramatic confession. He offered a lawyer and a spreadsheet. and the spreadsheet told the story better than any confession could have. Told it in columns and formulas that showed how much profit could be extracted from fear when fear looked like due diligence. Sloane Rigsby's name appeared in federal briefings 3 weeks after the convergence, appeared in internal FAA memos that acknowledged her audit trail had been accurate, had been buried because it was right in ways that would have required admitting systemic failure. Her documentation wasn't paranoia, it was precision, the kind that gets people killed when precision threatens revenue streams. Dion received a letter on FAA letterhead about posthumous recognition, and the letter didn't bring Sloane back, but it gave Layla something to hold on to when she asked why her mother's name was in the news. Maren Whitlock didn't get a redemption arc. She got congressional hearings and compliance orders and vendor suspensions that stripped Whitlock Aviation of contracts she'd spent 2 decades carefully building. Her company survived, smaller and audited and watched, and Maren took the hit because the alternative was letting the pipeline stay buried. She didn't appear on morning shows. She appeared in depositions and regulatory filings. And when Dion saw her 6 months later at a hearing, she looked tired in a way that money doesn't fix, looked like someone who'd chosen truth over comfort. Dion's payoff wasn't fantasy, wasn't a check with more zeros than he could spend. It was practical and deliberate. Relocation support that let him move Layla to a district where her route was his to control, legal protection from people who'd edited databases, and stable work with a federal contractor that valued mechanical intuition over credentials and paid him what his skills were worth. He chose the work instead of having it chosen for him, chose proximity to his daughter instead of proximity to opportunity, and the dignity in those choices mattered more than the salary. The system didn't end. It adapted the way systems do when exposure forces adjustment instead of collapse. New oversight protocols were implemented, new audit requirements were drafted, new vendor verification standards were published, and everyone involved understood that protocols are only as strong as the people willing to enforce them, and enforcement is only as consistent as the budget allocated to watching. One vendor from the original pipeline remained unidentified, disappeared into the kind of bureaucratic gaps that open when multiple agencies investigate the same network and nobody coordinates well enough to catch the pieces that fall between jurisdictions. And Rafe told Dion that unidentified vendors are redundancies built into systems designed to survive exposure, designed to lose pieces and keep operating. Dion received one final document 3 months after the hearings concluded, received it in an envelope with no return address and a postmark from Little Rock, Arkansas. Inside was a single page from Sloane's original audit report, a page that hadn't been in the capsule, hadn't been part of the evidence Maren had hidden inside the Harley's timing chest. In the margin, in Sloane's neat handwriting, was a note that said, "Check the paint. They use it everywhere." Dion looked at that note and understood that his wife had known the tamper paint signature wasn't just verification. It was a calling card, a mark left by people confident enough in their system that they didn't bother hiding their methodology, because hiding required believing someone would look closely enough to find the pattern. The $2.3 million Harley sat in Maren's private garage in Dallas County, restored and functional and untouched, and when Dion saw it one last time during an evidence review, he realized that someone, somewhere, was already building another vault, was already drilling another cavity into another machine, was already betting that the next set of hands that opened the next engine wouldn't know what to look for. Systems don't end. They adapt. And the only thing standing between adaptation and repetition is someone willing to look at a timing cover and see what doesn't belong.